Hello and welcome to Corridor 8 podcast. Today we have the honor and privilege to talk to Miss Nina Kurt, who is from Bosnia and is writer of the excellent report called Western Balkans as a Battlefield of the United States and Russian Interests. I recently read her policy paper published by the Balkan Studies Foundation on February 14th. Balkan Studies Foundation is an organization based in Skopje and is focused on research and analysis of Balkan geopolitics, history, and security. So her report caught my eye, and I was really interested in her thoughts and her research. And here is she, Nina Kurt. Hello and welcome to the podcast, Miss Kurt.
Hello, and thank you for having me here at this podcast.
You are security and politics analyst, and I would like to invite you to present yourself more broadly with the main topics of your research and in scientific interests.
Yes, so as you said, I come from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Here I studied my BA and then I went to the International Masters in Security, Intelligence, and Strategic Studies. So currently I'm working as a researcher, analyst, and consultant in the field of my studies. So that is mainly international relations, geopolitics, security, hybrid warfare, modern technologies. There's such a wide range of topics I'm covering, but I'm also, dealing with some contemporary socioeconomic issues around the globe. But primarily, I'm focusing my research on the Western Balkans, which I would say I'm the most familiar with. So yeah, there's a lot of things that I do. I really enjoyed them, and I don't know. This paper was just one of the contributions I had for the, let's say, the research of geopolitics, international relations, and the Western Balkans.
And what was your inspiration that drove you to analyze the region in this way as a battlefield of interests? And how do you see geography, especially, as a factor in this? So, what make you think about this topic, which is actually very, very important nowadays when we see the map on Europe, the Middle East? So, what was your motivation and interest?
Well, to be honest, I don't have really an interesting answer to this. The fact is that this topic, well, actually, the presence of the United States and Russia in various forms has been an important question across the Western Balkans for decades now. So in fact, I don't even remember a period when these two powers' influences hasn't been, discussed in the media, among the general public, in political circles, or elsewhere in each state of the region. So the overall importance and the long-standing importance of the topic, together with my personal and academic interests, has made me write this research paper. So there's actually no specific reason why I chose to do it at this particular time in mid 2025 when I wrote it. But I guess that my motivation actually developed from, continuously monitoring the rivalry between the US and Russia, mainly in Bosnia. But then I became interested to, investigate how these two states actually are positioned in other Western Balkan states. So that's why I wrote this research.
Your tone in the report is openly, it's neutral, but seems pro-Western, which actually I like. Uh, from which point of view uh, we should look at the Western Balkans? Can we be really neutral if we live here in the region? And how you how we choose our affiliations when we have to choose between the West and the East, in your opinion, what is the most intriguing for a scholar, for a researcher, and where is the border between being subjective and objective?
Well, I mean, there is, I mean, there's a thin line between being subjective and objective. I have to say, I have to agree with you on this one. However, I mean, everything when doing research, when doing any analysis, you need the facts-based approach. So that's what I at least intended to do in this paper. So I've analyzed each state. I've observed. I even have like a brief overview of the historical context and context of these two states' presence in each of the Western Balkan states. And I really tried to understand how and why is a certain state, either pro-Western, pro-Russian, or anti-Western, anti-Russian. Some of the findings, I have to say, really made sense. Some of them didn't really make sense. They were interesting and something new for me, which is, the significance of this research, I guess, to, sorry, to discover something new. So, yeah, when you ask me how do we choose our affiliations, affiliation is not something that emerges out of a sudden. It's rather something that is being accumulated over time, through history, through long-standing, deeply embedded ties, whether in a cultural, in economic, in political, in sociological way. And that's what I found in this paper. I mean, I will talk about it, but let's say there is, it makes sense why, for example, Serbia is pro-Russian oriented, and why, I don't know, North Macedonia is not, or why Kosovo is not.
Mm.
But I will talk about it definitely.
Yeah, excellent. I like very much this kind of self-reflection because it really helps us understand very well not only ourselves but the societies in which we live here and the region in general. So let's go on to the topic, and we have this wonderful presentation that you prepared for us for the audience of Corridor 8. So thank you very much. And let's look from the beginning. Okay, Western Balkans as a battlefield for the US and Russian interests. So what are the central questions of your research, and how did you define these topics?
Yeah, so, well, as I briefly already mentioned, the main intention of my research was actually to reveal the implications of the interest of these two states in each of the Western Balkan states and the region in general, specifically in the wake of, let's say, more recent events with the arrival of a new president on the helm of the US, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the disruption in, relations between countries at the global level caused by these novelties in the international arena. But even without the contemporary, geopolitical and security developments, this research actually observes well-known overall influence of these two world powers. So this paper, what I intended to do is to provide an overview of states' responses to the United States and Russian interferences, and to a certain extent to offer a forecast of the future implications of these influences in the regions. So, as I already said, I analyze each Western Balkan states and their responses with a brief overview of their their ties and historical perspectives. But the largest part of each analysis is dedicated to the scope and aim of the US and Russian influences in the Western Balkans in each state individually. Uh, and I limit my focus on the past 10 years. So, and I, focus on explaining the affiliation or the lack of affiliation of Western Balkan states to the US or Russia.
And what kind of methodology you used?
Yes, so I used desk research. I used all of the literature that was available for me online. I used already published academic work. I also examined national foreign policies and national, policies for internal decisions to determine in which direction is which state of the Western Balkans going really in relation to the US and Russia.
You describe Albania as the most American country in the region. And what, in your opinion, makes Albania so exceptionally pro-US? And how this alignment benefits the state's security and independence?
Yeah, so according to my findings from the literature, Albania expresses a huge affiliation to the U.S., which was interesting for me, especially in this contemporary age of anti-Americanism. So, as one of the analysis that I found shows, Albania almost blindly follows every step the US takes in its intention actually to create the so-called the Great Albania. Now,
Mhm.
there are several reasons I found to be a credible explanation of why is this the case. So one could be the fact that Albania's independence actually depends largely on President Woodrow Wilson's effort to keep the state safe from, being divided among neighboring countries, which is Italy, Greece, and Yugoslavia back like 1 century ago at the Paris conference. The second one, more let's say recent, could be the fact that Albania has strong security and military relations with the US upon Yugoslavia's dissolution, which are reflected in Washington's support for Albania accession in NATO. There's also one explanation, which is not so specific, I would say, for Albania, but still, it's a global trend, of identifying the US as the cradle of liberty and democracy. So while the communist regime marked by the US as the enemy to Albanians, and then Albanians started associating the US with freedom upon the regime fall. Then there's also one interesting that when the violent disintegration of Yugoslavia started, Albania's national security came under threat, and there was a possibility for Albania to be involved in an inequitable war with the former Yugoslavia over Kosovo. So at this time, Albania based her security approach on an aggressive pro-Western politics, and it strengthened its military relations mainly with the United States, from which it received all the necessary support and compassion. Um, Similarly, I mean, the intervention of NATO in the Balkans, especially in Kosovo at the end of 90s, made Albania again grateful to the decisive role and, let's say, leadership of the United States. So I believe these explain the Albania being the most American state of the Western Balkans.
Compared to Albania, which is ethnically homogenic and, uh, well, with long tradition, almost more than a century.
Mhm.
Bosnia is a young country in contemporary world, and it's internally divided. And Russia is encouraging the separatist tendencies in the Republika Srpska,
Yep.
through soft power, through direct political support. Uh, in any case, rhetoric by politicians. So you live there in Bosnia, and how do you assess the risks for division on the country, especially regarding the role of the High Representative nowadays?
So, yeah, as you said it, the situation in Bosnia in terms of affiliation as well as public perceptions with Russia and the US is really specific. So, the reason for this is the fact that Bosnia is internally divided administratively, politically, and territorially into two entities, so Republika Srpska and the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So, as both of these entities have different political interests and aspirations, the perception of the influence of the West in Russia differ among their political leaders and officials, but also ordinary citizens. So when it comes to Russian Federation, let's start with that.
Yeah.
Its attitude towards Bosnia and Herzegovina is ambivalent, but also is the attitude of the state's leadership towards it. So on the one hand, Russia is one of the members of the steering committee of the Peace Implementation Council of Dayton Accords, while on the other hand, Moscow is encouraging the separatist tendencies of Republika Srpska and its nationalist, anti-state, and anti-systemic policies towards Bosnia and Herzegovina. Now, besides Russian soft power influences in Republika Srpska, which are reflected mainly through support for Serbian militant nationalism, separatism, and anti-NATO sentiment, Russia also advocates for the abolition of the position of the High Representative, with explanations that its protectorate presence only harms the state's development and consolidation of democracy. However, Russia, besides politics, is also deeply involved. I mean, it has its hands on Bosnian economy and industry, and we have to admit it. This is mainly visible in the oil and gas supplies. So back 20 years ago, in 2007, Russian oil company privatized the oil industry sector of Republika Srpska by buying a majority of stakes in the three biggest oil refinery companies. In this way, Russia became the fifth largest investor in Bosnia. Now, still, Bosnia is dependent from Russian gas supply, although there are now initiatives on starting a huge infrastructure project to get a gas from other sources. But still, it's dependent. On the contrary, when it comes to the US, uh, I mean, especially in the sphere of politics, the US have been a decisive factor for the state's overall development since the state's independence, but also for its accession to European Union and NATO. And this is the US strategic interests to support the sovereignty, integrity, and the multicultural character of Bosnia and Herzegovina have remained the same over the past 3 decades, despite the leadership changes at the helm of, the US. Now, in Bosnia, there are positive public perceptions and politicians' attitudes toward the US influence, which can be, justified by this proactive involvement of Washington in the internal affairs. Now, when it comes to the High Representative, the US strongly supports the role of the High Representative and argues on the legitimacy of the role. This is especially for Christian Schmidt, which Russia and Republika Srpska are, dismissing. So this is definitely a diverging but crucial point between the US and Russia when it comes to Bosnia, but it's also one of the factors that, influence internal responses to these two states' interference in Bosnia.
And one very special case on the map of the Balkans, a very young country, the youngest one, Kosovo, claimed its independence 18 years ago. So it's there is no bilateral relations between Russia and Kosovo for a very simple reason. Russia don't recognize the independence of Kosovo, but still Russia has tools to impact the political and social life and the stability of Kosovo. First, through Serbia, and second, through its own veto power in the United Nations Security Council. On the other side, the United States strongly support the independence of Kosovo. What is, in your opinion, the power of Russia's veto in the United Nations Security Council as a tool to influence and to maybe to bargain something on the Western Balkans and in Kosovo, especially?
Yeah, so when the Kosovo, as you said, is a specific case. I mean, when talking about it and its bilateral relations, especially with Russia and the US, it is impossible not to take into account relations with Serbia. So, as I found from my analysis, not only is Kosovo the main, stimulating factor of Serbia's domestic and foreign policy, it's also the geopolitical anchor of Russia in the Western Balkans. So because of this, Russia has been a staunch opponent of reorganizing Kosovo's border along ethnic lines when this was initially planned, mostly because Russia is actually comfortable with Kosovo having the status quo. So this initially proposed division-based solution for the present situation in Kosovo would be just unfavorable for Russian strategic and geopolitical position. Besides this, I mean, as long as Serbia is dependent on the Russian veto in the UN Security Council, Moscow has a guaranteed presence in the Western Balkans, well, merely in Serbia, but it is therefore indirectly, at least, involved in the internal affairs of Kosovo. So, to sum it all up, I mean, Russia's veto power in the UN Security Council prevents Kosovo's full international recognition, and therefore it blocks the state from joining the UN and other international organizations, which makes the situation in Kosovo, permanently being characterized as a foreign conflict. So I would say that I mean, Russia's veto power is definitely I would say the most decisive factor for Kosovo.
Another very interesting case, Montenegro. After 2014, Crimea's occupation by Russia and also by the Russian-backed COP attempt, Montenegro shifted its allegiance toward the West very, very decisively, and is now a member of NATO. In your opinion, still Russia has some influence there, probably indirect, but you will tell us about this. In your opinion, what lessons that Montenegro learned from its experience, from what happened with Russian influence and Russian plans for the future of the country? And what are the risks today for the state?
Yeah, so you're right. As you said, bilateral relations between Montenegro and Russia deteriorated after the mutually imposed sanctions after 2014. As a consequence, the flow of Russian tourists, for example, to Montenegro has slumped, which negatively affected Montenegrin tourism and economy since Russian tourists were, a huge part of the Montenegro's GDP with over 5% of it. So this was significant in terms of Montenegrin tourism and real estate market because it highly depended on Russian contributions. But aside from that, Montenegro never actually prioritized, any economic and foreign trade relations with Russia. Now, now I also have to include the US in this. I mean, right after the US recognized Montenegro's independence, these two states established diplomatic relations which were based on friendly foundations, continuous political dialogue, both sides development, I mean, it was bilaterally, but also through strategic partnership with NATO. So, as security plays here one of the most important determinants of U.S. Montenegro cooperation, I would say this could be, a pattern. This could be a lesson that Montenegro actually learned and showed the other Western Balkan and can show the other Western Balkan states to follow, especially considering the current security and political situation in Europe and globally. So the diverse spheres of influence of the US and Russia in general actually illustrate how Western Balkan states, and in this case Montenegro, can be found in an unfavorable position of choosing whether they want to be more secure and politically stable through the US support, or if they would rather emphasize economic gains and benefits. So it just cost benefits analysis of different, interests, internal interests.
You note that Russia is not a priority for the society in North Macedonia, and the influence of Moscow is mainly expressed in some counter Euro Atlantic narratives since 2015. But the country is a member of NATO today, and it's on its path towards the European Union. But why do you think the Russian efforts have been remained so marginal compared to Serbia or Bosnia?
Yeah, I have to admit, North Macedonia was the most interesting, case in this research. So yeah, Russia's historically low interest in North Macedonia stems from a lack of deep historical ties compared to Serbia, for example, then limited economic investment opportunities, the relatively small military power of North Macedonia. As a result, Russia viewed the region as less critical, let's say, to its core security interests, all up until NATO and EU expansion in the Balkans intensified. So I would say that just because North Macedonia's strong determination towards the EU and NATO, which is not the case in, for example, Serbia and Bosnia, Russian engagement has remained relatively low intensity and largely, let's say, narrative driven in this particular state. So in relation to this, obviously one of the factors that um, keeps Russia away is strong US presence. But also there's another thing, that North Macedonia doesn't offer Russia what it needs for exercising its influence, like in Serbia, for instance. So North Macedonia lacks major strategic energy infrastructure to be controlled by Russia. Its Orthodox Church politics are less geopolitically instrumentalized, let's say, in comparison to Serbia, and the state is internally divided in a sense of Macedonian-Albanian relations, which do not actually easily translate into pro-Russian geopolitical alignment. So, as I said, this case was the most interesting for me because initially I thought that North Macedonia, due to religion and society, uh, basis would be interesting for Russia, but well, the research shows different.
Hmm, very interesting. And Serbia, we know that it's the country on the Balkans which is most deeply influenced by Russia, both politically, through energy infrastructure and supplies, through media, and you mentioned the church, so the narrative of Orthodox brothers, etc., etc., or the anti-Western narrative, especially since the NATO intervention in 1999. So, what makes Serbia the main political or geopolitical anchor of Russia on the Balkans? It's true that Serbia still has good contacts with the West, especially the European Union, still has some trade exchange with the United States, but openly it expresses much more pro-Russian positions. What makes this position of Serbia? And do you think they can remain on this situation like dual tracks, both pro-EU, but officially, but also very much pro-Russia?
Yeah, well, the most simple answer, I mean, would be that everything that the other states lack in the Western Balkans, Serbia has for Russian attention. So, in a more detailed context, from historical perspective, the complex relationship between these two states is, based on historical ties, a common religious belief, and the fact that both belong to the same ethno-linguistic community, which is obvious. Russian influence in Serbia is carried out by various means and on a wide range of aspects. So, political, economic, media, security, social, but it's also resorting to hybrid warfare methods, which aim to influence public opinion and internal political processes. Now, in terms of political influence, Russian high profile politicians and policymakers are affiliated to pro Russian political parties in Serbia. It has a proactive diplomatic corps that is, spreading Russian narratives, and the two states have, long established in interinstitutional networks and collaborations. So, as you mentioned, Russian propaganda is, spreading by continuously promoting the notion of world domination of just Orthodox Russia and the imminent collapse of the rotten West. Now, from the economic aspect, Russian influences are mostly reflected in Serbia's energy dependence on Russian gas, as well as in some, certain investments in infrastructure and energy. But trade relations and the presence of Russian capital, at least in comparison to other countries, which I found very interesting, are negligible in Serbia. So when it comes, contrary to other Western Balkan states, more than three-quarters of the population in Serbia now doesn't perceive Russia as a threat, and more than a half of the Serbian citizens from one of the surveys that has been conducted have approved Russia's military annexation of Crimea. Now, there are expert debates that show that Russia does pose a threat, and there's a conclusion that Russia is not the main cause of conflicts in Europe, but a state that actually contributes to them. Now, after 1 year of Russian invasion of Ukraine, I mean, Serbian citizens and also politicians still believe that Russia is not to blame for the onset of invasion. And still, people, despite the EU integration path of Serbia, are still considering Russia to be Serbia's most important political partner. Now, when it comes to the US and the West, I mean, the EU, the specifically for the US, the relations have been strained, but there were, several attempts to establish a more strategic dialogue in, let's say, in economy, in trade investments, in energy, environment, technology, even media, and so on. So, if you would be asking Serbian citizens, now there's an increase of the positive opinion of the population. Although still the unfortunate events of 90s still remain to be, let's say, the most the major determinant of how people and politicians from Serbia view the US because of the NATO bombing. However, despite the present and evident influence of Russian soft power and on Serbia, there's still division between the West, the Western affiliation, and the pro-Russian affiliation, as you said. Now, in my personal opinion, it can't be the case that a state can, be simultaneously affiliated towards the EU and the US, as well as to Russia. Especially in terms of, for example, energy dependence, because now the EU is trying to become independent from Russian gas, and it's demanding that from all of its EU member states. So joining the EU would ultimately mean, cutting those types of relations with Russia. And especially, I mean, Russia and the US are just two huge global powers which are contested in their foreign policies and cannot be found on the same ground. So, in my opinion, and based on my analysis, Serbia really has to decide which side it will take.
You highlighted in your research that Russia has malign influence through soft power, like the nationalism in Bosnia, like the energy supplies to Serbia, hybrid warfare. I think that also the impact of the Serbian Orthodox Church in Montenegro plays certain role here. On the other side, the United States promote the principles of democracy, mutual integration, security partnerships on the Balkans, etc. In your opinion, which of these, first of all, how would you describe these two different approaches? And second, in your opinion, which of them will be more effective on the long term in the Western Balkans?
Yeah, so I would say that the key factor of such difference is the fact that the US has managed to kind of institutionalize its engagement in the Western Balkans, and Russia lacks such an access to the region. I mean, each state in the region, in the Western Balkans. So Russia merely relies on influencing through the media, through exercising political patronage, impacting states' dependence on its energy exports, affecting identity politics, through these Slavic and Orthodox solidarity and identity and similar. While, as you said, I mean, the US influences focuses on sovereignty and democracy, uh, establishing partnerships in terms of security, integration support for NATO, for the EU, and so on. Now, I mean, as I said, this is the key factor of such influence. But I also think this kind of reveals my opinion on the second question of a more effective approach, considering the long-term effects. Obviously, it is the U.S. influence that has a more not just long-term effect, but higher effect.
Mm. Bulgaria had a lot of problems with its energy dependence from Russia. And the last several years, we put a lot of efforts to become energy independent country. And we have now the diversification of our resources through TANAP and the interconnector from Greece towards Bulgaria. So today, another sources of gas come here on the Balkans from another uh, producer, another country, mainly Azerbaijan. But Serbia is still very dependent, as you mentioned several times. It's one of the mighty weapons of Russia. And in your opinion, how could the Western world support the development of energy independence, development of new energy infrastructure, and generally, how could pro-Western states minimize its vulnerability from the Russian economic domination?
Well, yeah, I will use a case of an well example of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which has already started an infrastructure project of getting gas from the EU, well, from Croatia, to become independent from Russian sources. And now this infrastructure project, although it hasn't already started, it's supported by the EU, but also it will be carried out by the US infrastructure company, two of them actually. So this is, of course, highly important for Western Balkan states, as they're all, more or less progressing on their paths toward joining the EU. So, as I mentioned already briefly, this is because the EU is finalizing a complete and legally binding Repower EU plan, as I believe it's called, which puts a ban on Russian LNG and pipeline gas in place. So this plan actually prohibits most contracts by autumn 2027, which is already next year, making energy independence from Russia a fundamental, mandatory, and a long-term condition for EU member states. So, if not for joining the EU, generally becoming independent from Russian gas is important for Western Balkan states, also because of political and security uncertainties related to Russia. Now we've seen, due to invasion of Ukraine and the international sanctions that followed. Generally, I mean, importing such an important energy source from this type of a state with contentious decisions and action is just very, mm, I would say, risky, but even worse than risky. So Yeah, I think, and as you said, I mean, EU and the West, well, the US can greatly help Western Balkan states, and the Western Balkan states should accept the help that any of these Western partners are offering in becoming independent from Russian gas.
Mm. Especially in the sections about Serbia and Montenegro, you describe the media propaganda from which spreads pro-Russian narratives. So, how, in your opinion, the pro-Russian media and outlets and narratives shape the public opinion in these countries, and maybe in other countries too, like Republika Srpska? I don't know. And what the Western states could do in order to counter this anti-Western propaganda. It's very often what I have seen is expressions like "rotten West" or "Orthodox brothers," together, always together, etc., etc. A lot of slogans in Serbia, similar in other countries. So, what kind of opinion they create, what kind of attitudes they create in these countries, and what can we do as part of the West in order to stop this influence?
Yeah, well, I would say again, the answer is well, rather simple. I mean, just like the promotion of pro-Russian narratives, like you've mentioned, just Orthodox Russia, Rotten West, shape public perceptions, so do pro-Western rhetorics. So what I believe media, civil society organizations, activists, governing bodies can do is to promote Western values and sort of um, educate people on benefits from aligning with the Western powers. This is all about the power of words and, choosing the righteous propaganda method to counter anti-Western views and to articulate them among the general public, for the pro-West to create this pro-Western dedication and motivation.
Mm. So one of the things is to use the power of the words. And do you have other recommendations for the Western countries, for United States especially, but also for the European Union?
Well, definitely besides the power of words, obviously, they should be more involved. I mean, they are already involved, but continuous support and involvement in politics and aiding the political stability, development of the states, um, that will, show the results, positive results and benefits of being pro-Western oriented is, well, one of the approaches that is already, I'm saying, being at least partially implemented.
I think it was very, very interesting to hear your analysis. Is there something that I missed to ask you, Nina Kurt? Or something that maybe you would like to discuss further?
Well, I would say I've covered all of my findings, the whole analysis of this paper. I would just like to say that it was very interesting talking to you and discussing this issue. And maybe, I mean, I just hope that, as this is such a prevailing and important topic, I believe this might spur, other research being done. Um, there is still, room to include a lot of different aspects in this topic, and in any future research. And I hope the situation in the Western Balkans is not in general will get better, but that we will still have, something to do research on from a more, let's say, positive aspect.
Could we look at the comments of our viewers? Some of them say hello or greetings. Argir Stomrov is from Istanbul. Fotini is from Thessaloniki. So Professor Tuludi is asking why the United States left Serbia in the Russian influence.
Are we gonna take all of the questions in a bulk, or one by one?
One by one, it's okay. There are just two or three, so don't worry. So is it correctly to describe the situation like this? The United States left Serbia, or it's a different kind of thing?
I wouldn't say that it left Serbia in the Russian influence. It just I wouldn't say it left Serbia in the Russian influence. It's just the fact that the U.S. Is not so, let's say, publicly present and praised as the Russia is. So there might be, this false feeling of the US leaving Serbia in the hands of Russia, but I wouldn't say it's the fact.
Okay. And Professor Tuludi is writing another comment. She said, the same historical, religious, and ethno-linguistic ties exist among the rest of the South Slavs in Western Balkans, so in Bulgaria, in North Macedonia. How the United States even tried to achieve any kind of influence on Serbia? Well, it's hard, I'm a Bulgarian, I can say this. We have a so long story of connections with Russia.
Yeah.
And I might say the Russian propaganda is very good. It's actually, it's working on subconscious level. Like our national holiday, the 3rd of March, when the Bulgarian state was restored after 5 centuries, being part of the Ottoman Empire. Professor Tuludi, that it was a major event in the modern Bulgarian history. And still there are people who on this day wave the flags of Russia together with the flag of Bulgaria. And this is hard thing to make this mental separation, mental division in our minds. It's a very emotional thing. Unfortunately, Russian propaganda is good in the emotional pictures, images that it creates. I think it's very similar in North Macedonia. But Nina Kurt is very right. There is no direct Russian influence there. What I was thinking, we can just improvise on this if you wish.
Yeah, sure.
So the concept of a Russian world is actually the idea to restore the influence of Russia on the territories where Russian Empire existed, and then the Soviet Union, and there live certain groups of Russian-speaking people today through the migration in the times of the Empire and the Soviet Union. This is actually how Crimea became dominantly Russian-speaking. It wasn't like this, for example, 2 centuries ago. But Russia is very flexible. For example, it supported pro-Russian groups in Georgia, in South Ossetia and Abkhazia. It supported Transnistria in the north part of Moldavia. But it also had a direct military attack on Ukraine when it was possible to do it. And there another kind of propaganda and intervention in the Baltic republics like Litva, Latvia, Estonia. So there are very different approaches how Russia realizes or is working on the realization of the Russian world concept. Even Bulgaria is in the periphery, not by number of Russians here. We don't have much Russians, actually. Some people who migrated here during the Soviet Union, like mixed marriages, but it's not a big number. But we understand Russian because we studied Russian in the school, and we are influenced by the media content, which it seems to be related or dependent by people whose businesses are close to Russia, so they own the media. Especially today on the YouTube, it's very easy, on the social network too. So this is the way how Russia works in terms of Russian world. But here on the Balkans, we have another concept called Serbian world, Srpski svet. It was promoted by Serbian politicians, intellectuals, activists, and I was thinking, is it correctly to make such a comparison, Russian world, Ruski mir, Srpski svet? So can we describe the separatist and nationalistic trends in Republika Srpska in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the processes in the northern part of Kosovo, where live compact masses of Serbians, and the impact of the Serbian Orthodox Church in Montenegro, and the media, and also the church in North Macedonia. So I was wondering, can we say, it could be probably too brave statement, but can we think on these different ways of approach of Serbia as indirect way of a Russian influence, even in countries like North Macedonia, which you described as pro-US. And it's true, all the statements of the politicians in power are pro-NATO. They say that the United States or the United Kingdom are strategic partners of North Macedonia. So everything is like this. And still, they celebrate Saint Sava, and the streets of Skopje are full of billboards with the image of Saint Sava, the Serbian national saint, when it is the day of this saint. There are a lot of other events, like celebrating battles from the Balkan Wars, which hardly can be described as liberation of North Macedonia, even according to the official historiography of North Macedonia, but people still celebrate all these events. So can we say that there is such thing like Serbian world on the Balkans, and that it has different approaches in all these different countries, depending on the situation?
Well, I would say there is definitely, but that was, I would have to admit that was mostly visible before. Now, not so much. At least it's not discussed in such a way, among the public, among politicians, among academics and political experts. But I would say, again, cautiously, there is, Serbian world, Srpski svet. The idea of it still lives. Um, and what made me think now, when you were talking, I mean, it is kind of that wherever Serbia interferes, gets its hands on, for example, Republika Srpska, the Serbian part of Kosovo, the Orthodox churches all around the Western Western Balkans, it's, let's say, carries a part of Russia with it because of such a huge influence of Russia in Serbia. So they're kind of, the Serbia introduces the Russian influence. But yeah, I would say that, well, unfortunately or not, there is Serbian world, just like there is a Russian world.
I was thinking that probably Russia uses Serbian world to achieve its own interests on the Balkans, supporting
Yeah.
the a kind of Serbian nationalism today. It's
Well,
actually
yeah, I mean, yeah, could be, that could be one of the maybe better explanations of, or rephrasing of what I've just said. But definitely there is this collision of the two in the Serbian world, in the plan of Serbian world.
so. Ms. Kurt, thank you very much for your participation in our podcast. I think our viewers are really happy and delighted to have you on. Good day to everybody. Special greetings to Nina, a friend of us. Good day. Your corridors are top. I'm listening to you with interest. Hello, friends, and cheers. Greetings to the guest. So the guest make today's episode, friends. She was great, and her pronunciation, English pronunciation, is excellent. Not like mine. You know, I'm a product of the Russian world because I studied in the late 80s in school only Russian, and I taught English through books so I can read and
Yeah.
understand, but I can't pronounce. I have a very bad Balkan pronunciation. But you are the new generation, and our hopes are in you, that you will see a really Euro-integrated, peaceful, and beautiful Western Balkans world. Thank you very much, Nina Kurt. It was a great pleasure to have you in this episode of Corridor 8 Western Balkans as a battlefield for the US and Russian interests. Dear friends, you can read the report Nina Kurt wrote. I give you the link in the description, so stay with us in our future episodes. Long live Bulgaria, long live Macedonia, glory to Ukraine.